everyone, my name's Jessie. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am doing my review of Spin the Dawn by Elizabeth Lim. I think I am breaking up with young adult fantasy that revolves around romance, which I am so sad to say. This book follows a young woman who is an expert seamstress, comes from a pretty broken and poor family, but enters this competition and is given this opportunity to disguise herself as a man and go after the position of being the emperor's tailor. So this book was described as a cross between Project Runway and Mulan. I was very intrigued by that description, so I had to pick it up. And I will say that that description was accurate, but it didn't totally execute on the idea. I would say that this book definitely starts off with a bang. Right away we are introduced to this very likable character in this very atmospheric setting, definitely an old Chinese-inspired setting. It was very wonderful to read about. The author did an excellent job of describing the setting and giving us that good context of the world around us. So I enjoyed the beginning of this book, and especially the first part of it leading up to her entering the competition. I thought was really excellently done, and I was loving the direction that the book was going. That being said, once we got to the competition, I was noticing that this book started moving at a rapid rate. All of a sudden, the pacing was so fast. We were breezing through these different competitions that all of the different tailors who had come together were going through. All these different challenges were really breezed by very quickly. The supporting cast wasn't being fully developed and was very quickly rushed through. So I was very nervous. Kind of in the first part of the book, I was enjoying it, but I was like, how much longer can this competition be, because we've already gone through all of these challenges so quickly. So then we find out that that was only the first part of the book. Then there's a part 2 of the book, and that is when, for me, I lost it. I thought this book started off so strong. I loved how unique it was. It didn't feel like that typical young adult fantasy that we're starting to get oversaturated with. It was refreshing. It was something unique. And then part 2 fell into the typical young adult fantasy adventure story with the male romance interest. Man, that was so not what I was hoping for out of this book. It read like every other young adult adventure love story. It all of a sudden became much more concerned with the romance in the book rather than the world building and focusing on what made it different and unique and that cool Mulan Project Runway aspect. It was all of a sudden gone, and we were just in another young adult fantasy book. So I'm going to say that this is definitely 2 different books in one. It might even be 3 different books in one. It changes pacing a lot. The first part of the book, great. Second part, not so much. I will say, even though we start focusing on the romance, which it's not that this book didn't do it well, it's just I'm so tired of reading it in every young adult fantasy that I pick up. And, you know, I started my young adult fantasy journey with the Shadow and Bone series by Leigh Bardugo. Again, very heavy on the romance, but it was one of the first times I had read a young adult fantasy book kind of in this new era of young adult fantasy, and I loved it. I absolutely fell in love, and it's not that this book does that romance aspect any worse than Shadow and Bone did. It's that I'm just so sick of reading about it. So it does feel unfair that I'm kind of knocking this book because of that aspect. It's not necessarily a reflection of how this book is written. I think it's written very well. I think that the romance is developed well. It's not insta love, which I cannot stand as a trope. So I appreciated that. It's just, if you are a reader who has read young adult fantasy after young adult fantasy and you're looking for something that's going to give you something fresh and new and unique that's not like any other book you've read, this is not the book for you. However, if you are newer to the genre and you haven't read a ton of young adult fantasy that has romance in it and all that, then you might actually really love this, because you're not, being oversaturated with it. You're not reading the same thing over and over. And this could be something totally fresh and unique for you, like Shadow and Bone was for me. The other thing that I thought, besides the romance and kind of that direction that the book took, that I didn't love as much was the side characters not being super developed. So our main character, she's very well developed, and we definitely see her go through a clear character arc, which I thought was really well done. But all of our side characters around her, maybe besides the one romantic interest, are not developed whatsoever. I think that there was so much more potential to develop the Emperor. There was so much more potential with the Emperor's new wife, or I guess fiance, because they haven't been married yet. There was so much potential there, even with the other tailors that this main character is competing with in the beginning of the book. There was so much potential to develop these into really interesting side characters that bolstered the story up, versus kind of just being in the background, not serving much purpose. So I didn't love the side characters. I can't even remember really any of their names, which is really sad. So that, for me, I really enjoy when authors are very, very purposeful with the characters that they introduce to us, and they make them very memorable. Sorry if you hear whining, that is my dog. But this book just didn't do that. So if you don't mind, side characters not being as well developed, and you really are just looking for that main character arc and maybe that romantic plot, this might be a book that you really enjoy, because it does have great character development for our main character and our romantic boo. But for everybody else, they were kind of just pushed to the side and very underdeveloped. I will say with our main character, Maya, even though she does have a really great character arc, for probably 3/4 of the book, she came off to me as extremely incompetent. So, we are introduced to her right away as her being this expert tailor and seamstress, and she absolutely is. She demonstrates those abilities. But then when she disguises herself as a man, she does so in this really, poor way. She doesn't try. It's super obvious she's not a man. It's if anyone in this book had any clue, then they would pick up on it right away, because she just didn't do a good job. And I don't want to get into spoiler territory, so I'll kind of just keep it at that she appeared very incompetent with everything else in this story except for the tailoring. Besides that, which she was an expert in, she was extremely incompetent. And even on the whole adventure that her and the other romantic interest took, just very incompetent the whole time. So eventually at the end of the book, that does go away a little bit, but I didn't love how just reading about Maya being so incompetent was just right at the forefront the entire time during the first half of this book, because I just kept thinking, how dumb can these side characters be to not realize who this woman is. I will say for the ending, I did think it ended with something very interesting, but this is kind of where my comment before about this being 3 different books in one comes in, because the ending brought in this whole new element that really wasn't discussed a whole lot throughout the book. It introduces these demons and this demon character that really is not discussed the majority of the book until the very end, when it's necessary to start introducing them. So I thought it kind of came out of nowhere and did feel like a different book once that was introduced. And I did enjoy the ending, I think enough to maybe pick up the next book, depending on what that synopsis of the next book is. But the direction it was taking was very different than what I was expecting. So I thought it was interesting enough, but still it didn't feel like it was cohesive with the rest of the story, if that makes sense. Right, so that is my spoiler-free review of Spin the Dawn. Everything from this point forward is going to be more spoilery, so if you haven't read this book and you're interested in reading it, I'm going to leave you with, I gave this book 3 out of 5 stars. I think it did enough in the first half of the book to really set itself apart. I thought it had a really great beginning. I thought the writing was really nice, and Maya as a character does have a good arc. So I would recommend it to folks who are looking for more young adult fantasy with that adventure and that romance aspect. Maybe you haven't read a whole lot of it and you're wanting to continue to read more of that genre. This might be for you. But if you feel you're oversaturated with those types of stories, I'm sorry to say this is not going to introduce anything groundbreaking or anything very new. So it's up to you. And if you are leaving me now because I'm going into spoiler territory, I will say goodbye. And here comes my spoiler alert. So for the spoiler part of the review, the first thing I wanted to talk about was the magic scissors that are introduced in this book as kind of being this key plot element that drives the story forward. It's the reason Maya is so special and kind of has this big reveal about where the scissors came from at the end. The scissors as an idea felt kind of silly at times, like how it was described that the scissors were used and how they perform their magic wasn't totally, it just didn't make a lot of sense to me at first, especially when it's talked about how she used her scissors to embroider things. I was like, how do you use scissors to embroider? Some of that stuff was a little silly. So some of that like imagery I was getting from this book, it didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So the magic scissors I wasn't crazy about. I see what the author was going for with them, but maybe just something else to introduce a magical element instead of scissors. I don't know. I don't know why I got hung up on that. It kept being described, so I was like, every time they were described, I was like, oh great, here come the scissors. Other thing was Eden, our romantic interest in this book. I didn't want to say his name in the spoiler-free part, but the romantic interest, Eden, he has supposedly lived for hundreds and hundreds of years. He's this very, very old figure. He's what they call a sorcerer, and apparently Maya is his first ever love. This is the first time he's ever had romantic feelings for anyone. And that to me just didn't make a whole lot of sense. This guy has been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. He's 500 years old. You're telling me that until now, with 16-year-old Maya, he has never had any other romantic feelings for anybody ever? What? So that just to me came off as weird, and I thought, I feel like there was an opportunity missed because it could have been really interesting kind of exploring a past relationship he had or something that held him back from having romantic feelings for others because of, you know, something that happened in his past, and that was totally missed. Nope, it was just Maya's his first love, even though he's 500 years old. Okay, sure. I'll suspend my belief for that. Okay. Other thing I felt was a big miss was Lady Sarna, the Emperor's kind of fiance. She was very underdeveloped, so she had a ton of potential. There was a ton of mystery surrounding her in the first half of the book, and then all of a sudden in the second half we never talked about her again. Then she comes back at the end and is kind of, again, underdeveloped. We don't really know who she is or why, and boom. I know that there's a sequel, so maybe we'll get more development from her in the sequel, and maybe that's why that the author decided to hold back on so much, but she, to me, could have been this really cool character that either acted as an obstacle for Maya or helped her along, and we just never really got any of that from this character. We just kind of got this like really mean woman because she's engaged to this guy. That's it. And along those same lines, the Emperor. Who the heck is he? Who is this guy? Okay, so he uses his sorcerer Eden to charm people. Why? Who is he? Where did he come from? What is his background? What are his personality traits? Anything about this guy, ever? Can we know any of it? No, none of it's described at all. It bothered me to no end. These are the types of side characters I was talking about earlier that weren't developed at all and could have been so crucial to the story, added so much more depth to it, and instead they were kind of just breezed by as like having one or two traits each, and that's it. That's all you know. Again, sequel, maybe we'll get more, but you gotta wrap me in book one in order for me to read book two. You can't hold back everything. So I was disappointed in that too. I also thought at the very end, Maya going home didn't make sense. How did she get out of this palace that is apparently so heavily guarded, and she had so much struggle with hiding in and sneaking around in the first half of the book, and all of a sudden she can just like walk out any time of day with no consequences whatsoever and go back home for God knows how long to visit her family for whatever reason. That to me was totally unbelievable and was not well explained at all. It was definitely kind of the author getting to the end of the book and being like, okay, I'm ready to end it. Let's do this, the end, and just kind of skimming through a ton of this, what could be additional information, more depth, more development, because I didn't get it. How did she leave? Why would they let her leave? To go, I don't understand. So, maybe I missed it. I don't know. I feel like all of that spoilery stuff was really negative. I will say that some of the good things, I really thought the journeys to get each different thing for each different dress for Lady Sarna were really interesting and had a ton of potential, and I think some of it was executed well. So it's not all negative. It did get a 3 out of 5 stars for me. So curious to know what you all thought. If you've read this book, definitely leave your comments down below. Let me know what you think of some of those things I talked about. And I think that this for me is the last book I'm gonna read that focuses on a romantic subplot in a young adult fantasy. Because it's the same thing every time, and I'm just done. I've read enough of them. I've read enough that I've liked. I've now read enough that I'm not crazy about, and I'm done. So I'm definitely going to look for more young adult fantasy that is far away from any romance and contains something totally unique and fresh. I think that's what I'm now looking for. So again, like I said before, just because I didn't like all of that in this book doesn't mean it wasn't done well. It just means I've read so much of it at this point that I'm just done. But if you're looking for that, Baby Spin the Dawn is for you. To wrap up, great beginning, but felt like kind of 2 or 3 books fit into one. With a lot of that same sort of young adult fantasy subplots that we get in a lot of those stories. I recommend it for fans of Mortal Instruments. I recommend it for fans of An Ember in the Ashes, The Remnant Chronicles, Red Queen, any of those. If you like them, if you've been interested in reading them, I think you'd also be interested in reading this. So definitely give it a go. Don't let some of my more negative comments drive you too far away from it. Everything I said with a grain of salt. It's just how I feel. I've read other reviews that are very, very positive of this book. So I hope you enjoyed this review. I hope it was helpful in letting you know whether or not you want to read this book. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe. I release new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And until next time, bye!